Hey, hello.
Hello.
Hey.
在哪呢？
Sorry. Wait, what was it?
Where are you?
我现在在 Gant。
在杠的是吧？
对。
哎，你可以把你那个背景换成那个你咱海报嘛，到时候反正你可以开摄像头，当然不是换也没问题，但我可以正式一点。
好，你的海报能发在什么地方吗？
就这张吗？你看到那海报看到过吗？那个我是copy 的 Jesse 在群里贴的，我看一下哪个群啊？你可能不在群。
有，好像我是有这张的，稍等。
对，就这个就是对，换掉，可以。哎，你是怎么把你的脸隐藏掉的？
没有，我的这个摄像头现在是没有，等于说没有打开摄的。
OK， 没关系，那你就开一个这个吧，开一个你的那个海报。对，
主要是有点卡。然后主持的话好像是这个谁
Jesse
是吗？
对。
然后那就对，好的，我就负责技术支持好了。
可以。
然后似乎应该是没有什么问题。然后 YouTube 我发一下，我给你发个链接，你试一下能不能看到，好吗
？OK，
好，稍等。不对，不是这个 ，sorry。
你是在杠的哪一层啊
？2楼，你呢
？Core 4。
对 ，Core 4，对，然后你呢？
我在景观 Core 4，我在。
OK， 好的。
你跟着谁做那个？
这哥们儿叫J， 那我不知道你认不认识？教授，他是
YouTube 可以。
对，好的。
他有点延迟，
延迟好像是没有这个办法。
不用管，这个不要紧。
然后我之后应该还可能要确认一下，看他们能不能哔哩哔哩和
哔哩哔哩是毕琛在做是吧？
对，但是我不知道这个是不是可行，应该是可行的。
可以。你老师叫什么名？那说一下全名。
J 他姓啥我都不知道，说实话。
J 是个美国人吗？还是一个？
是，他是一个，对，他之前是在伯克利教书的，然后他现在在这里。
伯克利教书。
对，你呢？你现在是什么一个？
我老师是那个Kaleidoscope，他是一个建筑师，然后
很 interesting。
对，然后他是以前也是串系教的，他应该是3个系都教过，所以就说选，因为我以前学建筑的嘛，所以说感觉我还是觉得选一个建筑背景的更容易沟通一点。
是吗？对。这个当然，我觉得，如果你是景观的话，这个视角应该很有意思啊。就是说，你现在有2个不同的视角来看待，可能是同一组问题。
对，是这样的。其实我其实因为学建筑也好多年了嘛，觉得可能稍微 fresh 一点也蛮好的。就是现在因为景观关注这个 ecology 啊什么的也比较多一点嘛。
对的。
但是建筑你说。
不好意思，我说你之前是在哪里？
我之前在国内读的建筑，然后在萨尔克读了一个 urban design， 然后
非常有意思。
对。
那你这个是非常的视角非常的广泛。
就相当于说切换一下视角。
不仅视角，还有就是流派，对吧？从萨尔克到这里，应该是一个很大的一个世界观、价值观上的一个转换。
基本上是反着的，所以基本上你干任何事情都是互相批判吧，就是基本上就是说，可以这边讲的东西，你可以再想想你以前在哪学的，然后反过来再想想这边的东西，都很有价值。看你说看你在什么，就这样的话就好处就是说我不会焦虑，因为有时候吧，我在2的时候，包括这边，是听一种价值观的话，你也不知道要不要去，对吧？
对，我觉得你说的非常对，是的。
而现在的话，就是说你现在不论说什么，我就听一下之后。就是我知道这个事儿，我不反制，对吧？但是我究竟可以怎么做，我就是还不急着去做一个判断啊，不是说就是说现在我听起来感觉好像不太信这个事儿，那我就很痛苦，倒也不至于，对吧？我可以先按你的方法去做这件事情。
你这个是一个很怎么说？应该说是成熟的视角啊，我觉得一个很完善的一个视角。
相对说是不那么慌张吧，对，不敢说有多成熟，但是只能说 就相对更淡，比我以前的自己更淡定一点。
你之前是经历过这个实操之后出来，还是
我在国内工作了，在国内工作了好
哦，好，是设计院这样的感觉。
就在上海设计院。
好，可以，非常有意思，非常有意思。那你这个其实我觉得 GSD 个人来说，还是就是经过实操的同学和教授，我觉得在我个人心中可能信赖度肯定是高很多的。就是说这个还是
就是只能说是相对就是说知道的稍微广一点吧。就是说其实还有很多其实也给大家互相学习的地方吧。
对，
就是因为每个人来都带着不同的东西来，我觉得都是大家多交流都很有价值。
是非常不错。
今天中午我跟那个谁，我跟你们同学吃了个饭，那个伟晨
王伟晨是吧？
对，我俩基本上又聊了很多，我觉得伟晨也蛮有想法。
肯定的，对，伟晨很有意思。是的。你之前是哪里？
你们挨着近吗？你们俩坐的挨着近吗？
这哥们坐我正后方，对。
在正后方是吧？
对。他是，你如果哪天路过他桌子的时候，旁边有两个很大的显示器的桌子，就是我自己。
两个是很大的什么？
显示器。
OK， 那我回头去你们这儿 pass by 一下。
可以。
因为2楼我之前不知道是你们在那边，很少去。前几天那个孟非也在你们那个。
对。
这个是 James 看。
对。
Hi James.
Hey guys.
Hey, how are you?
Hey.
Nice to meet you.
Hi. Nice to meet you as well. Yeah, thanks for doing this. I'm excited.
It's our pleasure. I'm Yiqun. Currently, I'm the chair of the China GSD. So
nice.
Claude is my colleague. He is also part of our team. So
all right. Hi, Claude.
Hey, James. How are you?
All right. So where are you guys from? Which are you over from China or are you up in the US?
China and
which part?
Shanghai.
Shanghai. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and I was originally from Shenzhen, so.
Shenzhen. Okay.
Really
big boys.
Cities. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I spend a lot of time in Hunan, so that's my
countryside. Which city were you there?
What's that?
Which city for Hunan were you in?
Well, going in, I wrote a book about Nanyue, Hengshan.
Hengshan.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
So outside of Changsha, yeah.
Okay.
Hi,
so
Sergio.
You've been there for some
Yeah, I spend a lot of time there. Yeah, it's kind of the place I go. So way out in the countryside there. So yeah.
You did research there, or?
Yeah.
Cool.
Hey, Sergio. How are you?
Well, at least Sergio and I, we matched our sweaters with our appropriate. All of us wearing black. I was trying to match in with all you designers as a boring historian, So.
But you've done a great job.
What?
You've done a great job, James.
Okay, good. Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't do much about. I should have got my makeup artist to take care of with some powder for my shiny bald head.
I was just going to mention also, James, my dad's side of the family was originally from Changsha, so.
Oh, really?
I do think of myself as a Hunan native.
Good
so
for you.
Very excited to hear that coincidence.
Except you have to, if you're a real Hunan native, you can't pronounce it Hunan. You have to pronounce it Funan.
Funan, yeah.
Yeah, Funan. Local dialect, right? So.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, good.
No.
All good things come from Hunan. You know that.
All
the intellectuals,
very famous people for sure.
Mao Zedong.
Absolutely, yeah. My father was actually alum with the chairman's original middle school, so that was kind of a weird connection that we've got there.
Okay. Well, we're gonna have to get together sometime and chat about Hunan then.
Absolutely. And Sergio, thank you for tonight. And just as a side note, guys, I think I'm just going to be sort of running the technical side of things here.
Okay.
Thank you guys for any kind of issues. Please let me know ASAP, and I'll address them.
Okay.
And yeah, thanks. And thanks.
Sound is okay with my voice? Sounds okay?
Very good.
Okay. Good. And Sergio, so you're from Spain originally, is that right?
I am from Spain. I am from Madrid. I've been in the US for 20 years.
Okay. Yeah, my very first trip abroad when I was in middle school was to Spain and Portugal with my Spanish teacher. So, I think I was such a pain in the ass. I don't know. She said, she was taking some students over. If anybody was interested, ask your parents. And my mom was just like, yeah, go, So it only ended up being 2 of us. And we went with this teacher. I can't imagine that today, going on, all the way to abroad around the world with a teacher like that. But oh man, it was great. I love Spain. So.
Yeah, I miss it sometimes, but the thing that I miss the most is the ham. That's the thing.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
Yeah,
that the rest I think I'm okay, but that piece of food I really truly miss.
Yeah. Well, I'll take the weather in Spain any day too, especially this time of year. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, for sure.
I'm going to try to turn my light down a little bit so my head isn't so shiny. I'm kind of not liking that so much.
So I have one question for Ichun or Jesse or whoever. So when I was talking to Jessie said that she was going to give a brief intro.
Right.
And then I was going to say a couple of things, and then I will present first 20 minutes.
Right.
Then it will be James, 20 minutes.
Right.
And then we have a discussion between the 2 of us.
Yeah.
And that's going to last how long?
Depends on you guys. So we are totally fine. How long do you guys want? But we need to leave some space and time for Q&A as well.
Oh.
But I think I would love to make this kind of discussion happen before the Q&A. And
because we might get really interested in each other and it could go on all night. We may
take you till dawn. Feel free. But I think one way. So let's imagine, for example, the panel discussion between you guys could be maybe 20 minutes or half hour, whatever.
Okay.
If you want,
minutes should be good.
We want to say, okay, let's wrap it up. Just privately text me or Jesse, so we will know. Then we will try to moderate to quickly go through the question and answer. Then we wrap up.
Okay.
So it's flexible. No need to rush. We have a lot of time for that.
Okay.
So enjoy.
Do you mind if I try testing, just sharing my screen to see, make sure I have privileges here? Let's see if this works. Hang on just a second.
By the way, my name is misspelled behind you.
You
misspelled.
The E-I-E, it should be E-I.
Yeah, that is correct. That is very normal. Very normal mistake.
Sorry, Sergio.
Sorry, no worries.
I will talk to the guy who made the poster. Actually, I should check it. Sorry,
don't tell me who it is because I will fail him or her. So don't tell me. Don't tell me who it is.
Oops. Okay, thank you. Sorry for that. Oh, nice.
Okay.
Cool.
Let's see. Hang on a second.
Sure.
Can you see the slides or no?
Yeah, we can see the slide. Also, we can see the left series of demo.
Oh no, I don't want that.
Okay, but that shows. Yeah.
Hang on just a second. Let me stop it and try it again. I don't want you to see the demo.
Okay.
Okay, let me try this one more time.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. I might have to jump off now, but if everything works fine, and yeah, the screen share seems to be pretty good for now.
Okay, everything's good. Yeah. So if any question, I will let you know.
Can you see the demo now or just the main slide?
Now it's good. Now it's good. Only cover.
Okay.
Great.
And you can see that.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
2 o'clock.
Is that now you see a different slide?
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. I think Jesse is coming. Yeah.
Then I'll stop sharing.
Sure. Maybe
great.
Sergio, you can also facilitate it.
Sure.
Hi, Jesse.
Hi, Sergio and James.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, me too. It's a little bit, something happened with the Zoom link. So I actually changed my email to join.
Oh, you couldn't join?
Yeah, because I was the alternative host, but I just cannot join the original Zoom link. So I need to change my email in order to join this one.
Okay. So, but the other students can join, right?
Yeah.
They just, okay, let's wait a little bit. Yeah, we still have 20 minutes. So it's a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, James, I think you know one of my friend, Chen Lu.
Yes.
You know her, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So because we were also, you know, when we were planning this forum between you and Sergio, I was also trying to invite Yugen Wang.
Oh yeah.
For him to join this discussion, but you know, unfortunately, he will be actually now he's in travel, so it's hard for him to join. But
Okay.
we hope in future we will have more time and chances to do something together. So
Good.
Yeah, Chen told that you guys are really told us you guys are really smart to pick the right people to talk about this topic. So
Okay.
James and Sergio is really good at this topic. So please feel free to ask as much as possible.
You can tell us at the end of the night if you thought your choices were good or not, right?
Okay, we will see. We will see.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Looks good. This is going to be fun because it's like a complete surprise. I have no idea what Sergio is going to talk about. So this will be on the spot. We can reflect on everything. So
yeah, so
I like it. It's
no rehearsal, right? So
yeah, I think it's better.
Like a surprise.
Yeah, I'm excited about that.
I am actually very intimidated, James. I am not.
Oh, good.
I am not a Japanese scholar in any way.
And I'm not an urban, spatial planner or anything like that. Though I was going to tell you, my wife is actually a landscape designer, but she came at it through the angle of botany and things like that. So she's a real native plant specialist and things like that. So, but she has her own little business on landscape design down here where I live, about an hour south of Boston. So.
So you told me that you have done quite a bit of work on Japan.
Yeah. So I run the Harvard summer school program in Japan for about the last 10 years and lived in Kyoto for about 7 years back in the 1990s. I love Japan. It's just, it's been heartbreaking not being able to go there now with the lockdown. So I spend equal time in China and Japan. So
I actually took the first year of Japanese here at Harvard.
Oh, good.
With Kageyama Sensei.
Oh yeah, I just saw her today, in fact.
Oh, yeah. I love.
She's great. Yeah.
Yeah, phenomenal. So yeah, but I'm interested in knowing more about Japan that I already do, and I would really love to spend much more time in Japan as well, but it's very difficult.
Yeah. Well, it's good. This is great. Thank you, Jesse, and whoever invited me, because now I got to meet Sergio and we can get together and have some coffee and chat. And
no problem.
Yeah.
It's actually, one of my friends is from SEAS. So she actually suggested you, and she's saying you're the best choice to actually, join this discussion. So
who's that? Sergio or?
No, it's one of my friends.
Yeah,
Zhao Qingzhu.
Oh, I know Zhao Qingzhu. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. She gets an A in my class then.
Cool.
Hello, Ishin.
Hi, Sergio. Hi, James.
Hi, Ishin. Nice to meet you as well. Well, this is good. I actually really like, because I'm also the director of the Asia Center, Sergio. So I work with some people we actually have quite a lot of connections with the Graduate School of Design and different projects and things like that. So we'll have to get you involved now with your interest in Japan. I'll put you on the mailing list and yeah.
Please do. I mean, I'm sure that you work probably closely with Mark Mulligan.
Not really, no. Gerald Caden.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, Mark is no longer at the GSD, but he was here for many years, and he worked for a long time in Japan in the office of Maki. Maki.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah, famous architect, yeah.
And he's now the chair at Wentworth Institute. Here
okay,
but he worked for a long time at the GSD, and he organized I think he co-organized the exhibition of Japanese carpentry.
Oh yeah, of course, with Kyo. Yeah,
yes, that's right.
Yeah, I know. I remember going to that. It's great. Yeah, what is it? I forget the name of the company in Kobe. That's from Takayama or something like that. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. That was a great exhibition. I thought it was so cool that they only were willing to give it if Harvard agreed that they would allow carpenters to continue to use the tools. So they bring down people from Maine, I guess, carpenters, woodworkers, to use those tools because they say they have to stay alive.
Yeah, it was very nice to see.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, when I taught out at Williams College for a couple of years, my first job, and was on the committee that was working with Tadao Ando to do the extension to the Clark Art Museum.
Oh.
So that was that was really fun, actually. I don't know how I got on the committee, but it was just one of the best things when I was out there. It was really fun. And then to see, I left before it was completed and went to Michigan, but then went back and saw it completed. It's a spectacular addition.
I haven't been there, unfortunately.
Yeah, you'd like it. It's kind of an annex up behind it. It's definitely worth seeing if you get a chance.
I love to, yeah. I was reading your article. I mean, thank you very much for the book that you.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I read the intro. Seemed like really interesting. This connection between Buddhism and Taoism. I'm not completely aware of it, but from the side of Zen Buddhism, I mean, I think it's clearly understood that there's always been a very tight in principles and so on. But I was reading the article that you were talking about the relationship. Sorry, where is this? Faith in museums.
Oh yeah, that was that was a long time ago, but
very interesting.
Yeah, it was kind of just the effect of watching what was going on in Western museums and what was happening to places in Asia, and it was just a strange kind of thing to see, a kind of museification of sites, and then museums turning into kind of religious places. That was so.
No, these questions I think is very interesting. The lack of, I mean, I think in the West but there is in progressive circles an understanding or an agreement, a tacit agreement that society needs to be secular.
Yeah.
But it's interesting the perception how that is not really the case in many places that are not necessarily Western.
Yeah.
And how the acceptance of religion does not present a problem for any or other political agendas in the same way that it is in the West. So I thought it was very interesting to read the article.
Good, thanks. Yeah, that was fun. I was one of those. I have no idea how I ended up writing that, but it ended up being a fun one to do. So, yeah. And also, I remember thinking of spending time in Japan out of this island called Naoshima, which is a very famous museum there. And there's a really cool place there. It was an old temple on the island that James Turrell and Ando did together. And it was one of the most amazing. It completely blew my mind how they transformed it and turned it into this kind of interactive place where you walk in the dark, and then slowly your eyes adjust and you see this colored square at the front of the room, but it takes about 30 minutes until you see anything. It's pitch black. It's fantastic. So
yeah, those islands are very beautiful. Really, really phenomenal. There's a very famous building in Tashima, the Tashima Art Museum. One is like has been very popular in the recent past, and it's like one that I think all the students want to visit when they go to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that a typhoon, there was a famous, the pumpkin that Kusayama did that was at the Naoshima one and got knocked out by the typhoon. So
So Ichu and Jesse, do you guys, like, what do we need at this time in order to like accommodate and in order to like be aligned with Beijing time. Do you know if there's going to be students or people from China that are going to be joining us?
Yeah, we will have many students, I think, join soon, and also Chinese audience. They're gonna see this through the Chinese library show website Bilibili. So, and also some people will see on YouTube. And we, as we all also record this, we're gonna post this in our China GST YouTube account. So people will see this as an archive in future as well. So
I think last time we have 600 audience through the Chinese live streaming website.
yeah,
600?
yeah,
600.
Yeah.
For last time.
Uh-oh. We better think of something to say, Sergio.
I don't think we have 600 people whenever there is a lecture at the GSD. I don't think that's the case.
I guess that's the limitation of Zoom.
yeah. I don't know,
some
like,
of the-
but for me, I will try to join as many as possible for the lectures in the GSD. But I don't know. I feel like this semester there are not that many
Lectures.
This, I hope, but you know. So this is why we invited you guys to give us a wonderful lecture. So.
I'm starting to sweat here.
Me too, yeah. Actually, I run so many talks at the Asia Center, but I'm always introducing other people. So this is now I'm shifting to a different role. So, but I run at least one talk a week or maybe more. So it's.
Yeah, it's so great to have you for this lecture and roundtable. Really looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks. It's nice to meet you all. I hope we get to meet in person sometime too.
Sure.
Where is the Asia Center, James?
It's actually right almost across from, you know, the CGIS buildings, those terracotta buildings. We're in the south building on the first floor.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, basically that's where the Japanese carpentry exhibit took place.
Yeah, except we're one level above, not on the lower
okay.
level, on the main floor as you come in. So yeah, my office is right inside there. So yeah, I have an espresso machine in my office. Come by, I'll give you a nice.
Thank you.
My one addition to the Asia Center was I was said I can't live with here if we don't have an espresso machine. So
Your contribution.
yeah, my contribution indeed. Yeah.
Good.
So why did you guys translate kaleidoscope as Lengjing? Lengjing is a prism, not a kaleidoscope, but
Yeah, I guess that's the we're thinking of 万花筒.
yeah, Wanhuatong is a kaleidoscope, yeah. But I'm glad you made the mistake, not a mistake, but I'm glad you used, because I want to use both images of prism and a kaleidoscope together. So now you gave me the opportunity.
I'm glad.
So
Yeah, we have a debate actually on the name between 万花筒 and 冷静.
yeah,
I think 冷静 is kind
More
of
poetic? No, I
Yeah.
mean like
it sounds better, yeah.
yeah. And it's like you have to see the lights after a kind of like the distorted or distorted perspective. So we think lensing is more like fits into the topic.
Yeah. But actually kaleidoscope is nice in English though, because it when we talk about kaleidoscopic vision, you know, it's a mixed up kind of vision. So but I actually like the term, the Wanhuatong is nice as well, like 10,000 flowers or images, right? It's kind of it's exactly what it feels like, right? So
You pronounce very great in Chinese.
well,
yeah, your pronunciation is really great.
Well, it's
Have
only
you
two
learned
terms.
Chinese like for a long time, or
Yeah,
you work
too long. Yeah, maybe more than 30 years. So
Yeah.
Larger than us.
Yeah. Now you're making me feel old. I'm looking over at Sergio. He has hair. You guys so young, and now I'm feeling like an old bald guy. So
No, you're so knowledgeable, and we need to learn from you a lot. And yeah.
see, if I was a real Taoist, I would have very long eyebrows and a big beard. But so we're almost ready, huh?
So maybe we should shift the lecture to the Chinese. How about this?
Sure.
What about Sergio?
Yeah, Sergio, you need to learn Chinese.
不管他.
You spell my name correctly first, Ichun, and then I'll
Yeah.
Okay, no
there you go.
problem. Okay, I will do this. Then you're gonna start to learn Chinese. Okay. No problem.
Yeah, it's interesting because it looks at it and it would sound. I almost wouldn't have noticed it. Yeah, because it looks like So how do you pronounce it? Lopez Pinheiro or?
I mean, actually, the original has a tilde on top of the end.
On the end, yeah.
So it's Pinheiro.
Pinheiro, yeah.
But yeah, there's like this rule in English. What is it like? Never I before E after N, or what is the kind of mnemonic?
Yeah. I before E except after C and blah blah blah.
Yeah, and so I think that it's like they always make the mistake in the US. It's interesting.
Yeah. What does it mean? Any meaning to it, or?
So this is from the north west part of Spain, just above Portugal.
Okay.
And it basically means like a gardener or a farmer of pine trees.
Oh, perfect for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an architect, but yeah, like a gamekeeper of pine trees, something along those lines.
Okay. Do you live right in Boston, Sergio, or
I live
in Cambridge? Or
I live in
Cambridge. Okay.
You have to pronounce it in Spanish.
Pinheiro.
Pinheiro.
López Pinheiro. Sergio López Pinheiro.
Sergio Lopez Pinheiro.
Yeah, please bear with me if I made any like pronunciation.
No, come on, Jesse.
Yes.
Come on.
When I'm doing the introductions.
Please, no worries.
Someday you'll have to come down, Sergio, to where I live. I live near. Do you know the trustees of the reservation land called World's End?
Yes.
Yeah, so I live just about 10-minute walk from there. But the house we live in was done by the previous chair of architecture department at MIT back in the 70s, a guy named Donlin Linden, who was a very famous architect in California for this kind of a sort of hippie place up in Northern California called Sea Ranch, which you may have heard about.
Of course.
So this house is the only one he did on the East Coast, and so because I'm from California and we used to go there all the time, so when I saw his name was the architect for it, I said, "Oh, I'll go take a look," and then I was said, "Okay, it feels like California, I'll take it." So everybody on the East Coast is so confused by it though, because it's not an East Coast kind of place, you know.
Sea Ranch is incredible.
Oh, I love it. Oh, yeah.
Very, very phenomenal.
Yeah.
Are you from Northern California or Southern California?
Originally San Diego, and then
okay.
Bay Area. I went to Stanford after that, and then, but mostly, yeah, those two places. So, all right.
Okay.
Getting close.
Yeah, let's wait maybe 3 minutes. So I think people is joining. So
okay.
Let's wait until 9:05 and then we can start. All right, let's get started. So welcome everyone to our fifth roundtable lecture through the Kaleidoscope, Shifting Visions of Space, from the series of talk from Cambridge at the China GSD. As a student organization, China GSD fostered a collaboration between the broader Harvard community and offers a platform to facilitating cultural exchanges between Chinese students and the broader GSD community. Today, the roundtable will be focused on discussing the definition of space under Western and Eastern cultural backgrounds. By paying attention to the shifts in spatial sensibilities related to Zen Buddhism, and also acknowledging the linkage between the micro and macro cosmic scales of space within the Chinese Buddhist and Taoist tradition. And it's a great pleasure for me and China GSD to introduce our speakers for today. Sergio Lopez Pinheiro is an interdisciplinary architect who explores voids as a socio-spatial phenomenon of freedom, diversity, and spontaneity. He is the director of the design studio Pose of Matter and a lecturer in landscape architecture at Harvard GSD. Sergio is an author of the book A Glossary of Urban Voids, which is published in 2020, and also with his upcoming book titled as Typologies for Big Words. James Robson is the James C. Kralik and Yun Li Luo professor of East Asian Languages and Civilization at Harvard University, and also the Victor and William Fong Director of the Harvard University Asia Center, and he is also a Harvard College professor. He received his PhD from the Stanford University after spending years doing research in China, Taiwan, and Japan. His specialties in the history of Chinese Buddhism and Taoism, and he is the author of The Power of Place, the religious landscape of the southern sacred peak Nanyue in medieval China, and which is published by Harvard University Press in 2009, which was awarded the Stanislas Julien Prize by the Académie de Inscription de Belles Lettres. And also, he's currently served on the board of Kuroda Institute for the Study of Buddhism, and also he is a co-editor of Tongbao. And we will start with the presentation from Sergio and James, coming along with a panel discussion, and lastly ending with a Q&A session with the students. So now I'll turn it over to Sergio, and again, thank you, Sergio and James, for coming.
Hello, everyone. Good night, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Jesse, Yishin, and Ichun, for the opportunity to present to all of you. I think I'm just going to jump into my presentation, but first, I want to say something that I think it's interesting for the event. When Jesse reached out to me to give a presentation, we were talking about several different topics that could be talked about, and we were discussing how, if there's any tensions that exist when Eastern students, or most particularly East Asian students, come to the West to study, how their education, particularly when it relates to design, could be based or might be based on philosophical, cosmological, religious foundations that are actually very different from the ones that they were originally brought up. And so we were discussing a possible opportunity to talk about these questions, whether these different forms of education represent a tension or an opportunity for creativity and innovation. And so the roundtable that Jesse, Yishin, and Ichun have organized, inviting James and myself, I think comes out of that discussion. That the purpose is like to really understand how to think about this question. I think that, for example, at the GSD, I think we have an understanding and an acceptance of these modes of thinking, but we typically put them always within a historical context. We never look at them in an instrumental manner. We never look at them in an operational way. And so I think that hopefully with today could be like a way of starting to discuss some of these questions. I will be talking today about a topic that is personally very interesting to me, which is that of emptiness and how it is misunderstood in the translations between East Asia and the West. In this particular case, which is the one that I am most familiar with, that I'm more knowledgeable about, I'm going to be talking about Japan in the shift, in the change from the Heian to the Kamakura and Muromachi periods. And so, just for a clear understanding, the Heian would be the peak of the Chinese influence in Japan. That's between the 8th and the 12th centuries. A lot of Song Dynasty influence in Japan. And then the Kamakura and the Muromachi go between the 12th and the 16th centuries. At that point, we see an emergence of Zen Buddhism imported from China, Chan Buddhism, and then the consolidation of Zen Buddhism as not just a religious force, but also as a cultural force that parallels other socio-political and economic changes that happen throughout Japan. So I'm interested in the spatial models, sensibilities that arose in that moment in time, when there was a shift in understandings and in cultural traditions and practices. So I'm going to start with this. This is the Sakuteki. This is arguably the first landscape architecture or gardening manual in the world. It is from the 11th, 12th century in Japan. It's a little bit unclear who wrote it. The translation that I'm showing you here is the one that is most available right now by Jiro Takei and Mark Pekin. And basically, the Sakuteki synthesized all of the gardening and landscape practices that were being used at that moment in Japan. And so again, these gardening and landscape practices were primarily of Chinese influence. And they put forward a model of garden that was based on geomantic principles. and that used primarily water as the main mechanism, as the main medium through which these principles were actually expressed and defined. So here we have like the gardening styles, which are like 5 primarily, and as you can see, they all have like some kind of water-related theme. This is from Gunther Nietzsche, Japanese Gardens. He says like Sino-Japanese geomancy is based on a holistic view of the cosmos, in which man is seen as an integral part of nature and its energy fields. A fundamental acknowledgement of the interdependence of all levels of reality, both natural and man-made. And so what we have at this moment in time, and these are like some examples, some illustrations of what these gardens look like. None of them have actually survived to this day, but how these gardens have these principles that looked primarily at water, and that were based on a cosmology and an understanding of the world that was based on energy lines, on flows, understanding that everything was interconnected, and that the whole world, the whole cosmos, operated as an interrelated whole with clearly defined lines of energy. And the spatial expression that came out of that cosmology, of that model, in the case of gardening was, for example, this one. This was in the first translation in English that we had of the Sakuteki by Shigemaru Shimoyama. And this is one of the drawings included in this translation, and a reproduction of an older print. There's other examples that we can see, and in all of these cases, we see a space, a garden, a landscape that is interconnected, that is not separated or fragmented, that is seen as a whole. Water is always flowing. We never see the beginning or the end of water. It's always understood as a set of interconnected spaces flowing freely. Here we have another such example. Again, same kind of situation. And so that's the model that was in existence and that was being used for the development of gardens for the noble class. Somewhere in the 12th century, Zen Buddhism started to be imported and gain presence within the Japanese realm, within Japanese life, and new sets of principles or ideas started to be discussed. One such, obviously, is emptiness. And in this particular case, in the book by Frederick Strand, he discusses emptiness. One of the possibilities of thinking about emptiness is as the relatedness of all existing things. By keeping this in mind, we can properly discuss a third dimension of the religious significance of emptiness, the concern for radical relatedness. It's a cosmological or ontological dimension. And how it's interesting to think about the spatial connotations or translations of this model. This is a brief text, The Unique Characteristics of Buddhism by Shin Yun, where he describes, based on the treatise on the explanation of Mahayana, the 10 characteristics of emptiness. And it's particularly insightful to me. And obviously I'm speaking here as an architect and interdisciplinary architect, someone that is in between architecture and landscape. It's really insightful to look at emptiness described in 6 or 7 out of the 10 characteristics, always in terms of space. Emptiness in this particular case is seen as a spatial characteristic, or or a characteristic that could have clear spatial connotations. And I find this very insightful and very, very interesting and provocative. I see the possibility of a clear translation. And I mean, there could be many examples, many different types of koans or cues or cases, depending on which language and which tradition we're using. But Chan Buddhism and Zen Buddhism, one of the methods that they use in order to achieve enlightenment is that of the koan or the case. This is one from the Blue Cliff record, which is a compilation of Chinese cases that was brought into Japan by the Zen master Dogen in the 12th century. And this is a translation into English. One of Dogen studied Chan Buddhism in China, and so he brought this to Japan. So this is Cao Chou's newborn baby. This is one of the koans. He says, a monk asked Cao Chou, does a newborn baby also have the sixth consciousness? Cao Chou said, like tossing a ball on swift flowing water. The monk also asked Tao-Tzu, what is the meaning of tossing a ball on swift flowing water? Tao-Tzu said, moment to moment, non-stop flow. So here we have a set of religious principles that could be translated or could be expressed in spatial terms in a particular way. The interesting thing to me is how they appear in different buildings and gardens, and how they are expressing or not expressing, connected or not connected to previous traditions. So I want to look at one specific case, which is the Daisen Inn in the Daitokuji in Kyoto in Japan, which is a well-known monastery, well, complex and then monastery, the Daisen Inn. And so through this example, I think that we can look at some of the continuities that exist between some of the sensibilities that existed prior to the introduction of Zen Buddhism, some of the misunderstandings that have existed also in the translation or in the communication between this type of landscape and garden and space onto the West, particularly as related to the concept of emptiness. So here we have the Daisen Inn, which maybe is a plan that many of you know. This is the main meditation hall. This is a really important tea room with what is considered to be the first tokonoma in the history of Japan. The main entrance to this particular temple, to the Daisen Inn, is through here, through this court. And then we can see that this building, that is almost prototypical of all Zen temples in Japan, is surrounded by a set of gardens. Here we have one, which is a well-known one with the two cones. This is a completely dry garden surrounded by a low bush. Here we have another one, a corner one, very, very famous one, divided, separated with this from a bridge. Then there is a wall with an opening. There's another one. This is also an open space. So here we have like three spaces, three outdoor gardens that are actually, despite everything, separated by three walls. This and this is separated through a bridge. This and this is separated through a corner through the building. This is all outdoors. So the only part that is enclosed is here. So we have like the building is freestanding and surrounding potentially on all sides by gardens, but the gardens are actually fragmented. They are compartmentalized. So we have a spatial model here that is like already interesting to me. Here we have like that back garden. This is the area, the footprint of the area that is enclosed. So this is indoors. This is an outdoor engawa or porch of sorts that you can walk around. This is the famous dry garden. This is like the famous corn garden, another garden, there's another garden out there. This space, despite the fact that it's all outdoors, is separated into by three walls, and this one by a bridge. And here we have another famous woodblock print of that particular corner. This is I think some of you may have visited, many of you might know this building and this garden. So this is the corner. This is that area. We can see here the entrance or the fusuma to the entrance of that tea room that I was mentioning with the first tokonoma. This tree is this tree. So we're moving through the engawa, we're moving here. This is that wall that I mean that separated this space from that space. And this is the wall that separates this garden from the garden on the other side, which is private. And this is the large dry garden in the front with the two cones of gravel. And so this is the thing that has always fascinated me. We have a spatial model that achieved maturity in the Heian period, clearly influenced by Chinese aesthetics and gardening practices, a very, very mature, very sophisticated spatial model based on particular conceptions and practices, so mature that it was actually typified in a treatise. So clearly sophisticated, extremely sophisticated, defining classes of workers and particular knowledges. And at a moment in time in which we see a shift in religious questions or the introduction of a new religion, a shift in political power, and the development, the large development of a wide array of aesthetic, of new arts and aesthetic models. Here we have a Zen temple with a set of gardens that is based, that encompasses a religion that looks about the interrelatedness of all things, about the need to like think of flowing, of change as an essential part of reality. And instead of using the spatial model that was already existing at that moment in time, through the Heian period, something that was based on lines of energy, something that was based on flows, something that was based on things that had no end. Instead of using that model or some part of that model, we have a completely different spatial type. Things become fragmented, things become compartmentalized, things no longer flow from one to the other. And so the question that I always ask myself is like, why is that? Why did that shift in spatial sensibility? What does it reflect? Why did it happen? And it's interesting to me to think about these questions because of how they can influence our understanding of space within broader social, cultural conditions, but also for our own. So I want to talk a little bit about this. And another question, like, I mean, this is a completely sidetracked, but this is a well-known book on ecology, Barry Commoner, very old, completely superseded, but the First Law of Ecology, everything is connected to everything else. Very similar expression of words as that of the interrelatedness, radical interrelatedness, as expressed in the slide that I showed earlier. However, again, despite the fact that we can see that connection, no garden of the ones that exist within Zen temples could be understood as ecological in any way whatsoever. Fragmentation, separation is not an ecological principle. So again, this is another one of these moments in which things don't click, and where I start to have questions. This is a sidetrack. So at this moment in time, and this is maybe like also an anthropological principle, whenever a society is undergoing deep developments, whenever it's really engaging in broad cultural developments, there is typically an increase on types of spaces. There is typically an increase on specialization, spatial specialization. And we see not just invention of new types of spaces, but we also see that the spaces that used to exist become more articulated, subdivided, spatialized within themselves. This is a principle that we can see across all human societies. So in this particular case, during the late Kamakura, early Muromachi, we see the introduction of also a new architectural style that saw the introduction of new types of buildings, but also the new types of spaces like that of the tokonoma. This is Gunther Nietzsche again, and he talks about the new, the appearance of all of these small niches or spaces that happen within the rooms themselves, and also the introduction of wall partitions as Fusuma and Soji. So we have like this kind of interiority. There is like a further subdivision, fragmentation, separation between things, a further specialization that happens across indoors and outdoors, across the many different types of buildings and landscapes that we can look at. It's a very interesting moment, a moment of great creativity and innovation across Japan. A moment that can be, in my mind, compared to other moments in history in other societies like the Roman Empire or like the Enlightenment period. There's also at this moment where the tatami is introduced and well, not introduced, but it starts to be like widespread use. When tatami came to be spread over the entire floors of rooms, various points of etiquette for their arrangement came into being. The practice of spreading tatami over whole rooms became established during the Muromachi period. And so there's like new rituals that are related to a new form of constructing the slab, constructing the actual ground of the building that is defined on a specific module. And so we have a shift in spatial sensibilities, and we have possibly a connection with previous landscapes. Wiebe Quittert, has talked about how the difficulty of really talking about Zen gardens as a specific type. She's very critical of this term. So she says, medieval art garden as the developing of a scenic type of garden. It is a composition as well as aspects of its appreciation derived ultimately from Chinese landscape art. So she argues, as we have seen, that the gardens that appear within Zen temples and the new military class are all scenes. They're compartmentalized, but they're connected to Chinese landscape art. They have nothing to do with religious origins. And she says that the present literature on the garden art of Japan does not give any convincing example that medieval individuals had an experience of Buddhist enlightenment on seeing a garden, although I must admit that it seems not knowledgeable. For the time being, the word Zen can only seriously be used with regard to medieval art garden art when it indicates a cultural inspiration by Song or Yuan China. The question remains then whether it should be called Zen. The point that she makes is that the reading or the conceptualization of these gardens as Zen is something that happened in the 20th century through the work of D.T. Suzuki and Kitaro Nishida, who packaged the understanding of these Zen gardens, related them to a Zen Buddhism, and that is the understanding that the rest of the world, particularly in the West, we got. This is an interesting argument and one that I think it's very important to take into account, but there's like several issues that I find difficult to follow. One of these is Gunther Nische. He says that Quitter's doubts may be justified by the fact remains that even China's Song and Yuan cultures were heavily influenced by Zen Buddhism. I'm assuming that he wants to say Chan Buddhism. It is also a fact that the most important dry landscape gardens of the Muromachi area were almost all built within Zen temples. So this is like one important question, that there is a connection with traditional Chinese landscape aesthetics, painting aesthetics, and that also, that's one point. Another point is that there is a compartmentalization of space that could be connected with certain religious principles, as we will see in a second. But the third is that also this could have been packaged and redefined in the 20th century in order to get an understanding of a particular type of space, which is a possibility, but I have difficulty following that. Joseph Parker, Zen Buddhist landscape arts of early Muromachi, Japan, he is able to argue and define how the monks, Zen monks, during the Muromachi period were actually very aware of the different cultural developments and were living these cultural developments interconnected with the religious faith, with the religious principles. And he discusses how, using different references, for example, as Arthur Whaley once observed about the Kitayama period, it was in the language of Zen that poetry and painting were discussed. And so the relationship between Zen Buddhism and the different cultural developments that happen at this moment in time are, in my understanding, are like clearly interconnected. And so there is an interesting friction here that that I think is worth exploring from a spatial point of view. Also, the argument that that, let's say, East Asian or Japanese Zen Buddhism was packaged and in order to be invented, discovered by the West, it's a fair argument, but it's also like something that has been made before. Urs Arp in different ways. And it happens every time that there is a discovery across cultural boundaries, or like a realization across cultural boundaries. So Urs Arp, The Cult of Emptiness, the Western Discovery of Buddhist Thought and the Invasion of Oriental Philosophy, talks about the first reports that were received in the West from Jesuits, particularly Jesuit monks that were visiting, that were trying to, that were in missionary missions through East Asia. In particular, the first one of these reports was actually by Cosme de Torres, who was a Spanish Jesuit. And through these reports, the misunderstandings between terms, between the meanings of terms, were already in some way already defined. Thank God my last name is not Torres. Because already it will be quite funny. And so this is a this to me is the most interesting question here, that is defined by Arata Isozaki when he discusses the term ma, himorogi. Ma is a way of situating the place when kami descend. So there is a strong Shinto practice that actually can be seen as influencing the Zen gardens or the gardens that appear in Zen temples at that moment in time. And so we have a condition, and here we have like the cones that are white sand shaped into a cone was among the symbols used to mark a place where the kami, the spirit, descended. Such zones were always located before the porch in the gardens of noble families, and they were also placed in the inner courts of Shinto shrines. And the same way, the gravel was used in order to define the space. So what we have is a compartmentalization or a definition of a bounding of space that is also connected with native, original, indigenous Shinto practices that were happening, superimposed, syncretized with Zen Buddhism. Most importantly, we have originally the word utsori meant the exact moment when the kami spirit entered into and occupied a vacant space. Later, it came to signify the moment when the shadow of the spirit emerged from the void. So there is an interrelationship here of terms that are quite interesting. We have an idea at Zen or a Buddhist conception of emptiness as a religious principle that is overlaid with a Shinto speciality that also is connected to that term, but that obviously in the West has been misunderstood. And so rather than understanding the term as emptiness through its Buddhist connotations as interrelatedness, is appreciated through the aesthetics and the compartmentalization of spatial boundaries of Shinto practices. And this overlaid with the influences of Chinese landscape painting produced a knot that was like completely innovative and creative at that moment in time in the development of spatial sensibilities in Japan, but it's also one that has been completely misunderstood in many different ways in the West. And so these translations and these interpretations are the things that I find like particularly interesting in discussing the possibility of different traditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. And let's pass it now to James.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Sergio. That was really fantastic. And I see that we'll have some really interesting comparative kind of comments that we can make across our two talks. So also, I'd like to begin just by thanking Jesse and Ichun and Ichin for the invitation to join you all tonight. This is really, for me, just a real joy because it takes me back to my original interests, which were in landscape and what I would call sacred geography, the intersection between the landscape and religion in East Asia, and particularly focusing on sacred mountains was my main early interest. And so coming back to this and thinking about it in new ways after many, many years of kind of putting it aside for a while, I thought this is a great opportunity to try to bring some of it together. So I've already been able to note a number of areas where Sergio and my presentation have some correspondence to it, but I was really glad to see his commenting on some of the ways that kind of Eastern Western sort of conceptions of space have some profound differences, but also some, interestingly, I think some kind of profound overlaps, I would say, even, which maybe perhaps are related to our sense of all being humans and having certain forms of perception and consciousness about the things that we perceive. So I'll be trying to join a few of those as we go along. So I was a really poor student in high school and didn't pay attention much in class. But one of the things I remember most about my entire high school education was in a biology class. And I'm not sure if they still use it, but they had this film that was called The Powers of 10. I don't know if anybody has ever seen this before. And it begins with this couple lying on a blanket. And then it goes in two directions. It zooms in first into the couple, gets closer, goes all the way to their skin, and then goes down into the cells of their body. So we're brought into the most microscopic level. And then it goes back to them sitting on their picnic blanket, and then it goes out, and it takes you out into the cosmos to the largest macrocosmic level. So the talk that I'm going to give you this evening is going to be playing around with this idea of the relationship between the microcosm and the macrocosm, and looking at these two different scales in terms of space. So I'm really glad that Sergio brought up this notion of emptiness. When we look at both Buddhist and Taoist cosmogony or cosmography, that is to say the beginning of things, both of them begin with the notion of the void or nothingness or emptiness, that everything begins at this point. In the Buddhist concept, it's just open, it's space with no limitations and no characteristics. And then as the story goes, the winds of karma blew, and that began to create the physical world as we know it. And it's a long story I won't get into, but just how humans came to inhabit that. It's actually interesting because they also have a theory about the beginnings of architecture at that point, the first human kind of habitations. I can say more about that later in our discussion if you're interested. But in the Taoist one, which is better known, I think to most of you, is that things began with this void or wuji, which means really unlimitedness, the unboundedness that has all potential to it. And out of that was created the one. And then the one splits into the dyad of the two principles of yin and yang, and that's male and female. It actually begins as, interestingly, with the landscape metaphor, where these were the two sides of a valley, one side in the sunshine, which is the yang side, therefore it's related to things like heat and dryness, and the other with yin, which was the shaded side of the valley, which was wet and associated with water and things like that. And then as the cosmogony goes on from yin and yang, the two, then we have the birth of what they call the 10,000 things, the Wan Wu. And that means everything comes from this kind of progression out of the emptiness or the void to create everything of the phenomenal world around us. This becomes a very important conceptual scheme. And in a sense, one could think of the goals of religion and is to get back to that primal origin of undifferentiatedness, sometimes referred to even as chaos, before things were differentiated. And indeed, in Chinese, they call it hundun. This is an interesting term. If maybe some of you went out and had dinner tonight and had wonton soup. Wonton soup is hundun soup, chaos soup. When everything is mixed together without it being differentiated. So interestingly, then the next development is this notion of, and I think this is what Sergio was getting at when he was talking about the interrelatedness of things. This is grounded in very early Chinese conceptions of what we often refer to as correlative cosmology or five phases, Wuxing theory. Very complicated, interesting notion of the interrelatedness of things across different domains, connecting the elements of wood, fire, there's a typo, it should be earth in the middle there, metal and water. And then colors, green, red, yellow, different directions, east, south, the center, west, and north, the seasons, and then interestingly, the viscera, the organs inside the body. So note the connections here of things which are external, things which are internal, and again, connecting things at a microcosmic and macrocosmic level. So this led to all forms of creative connections across these different domains. You could find correlations then, and it was thought that the natural world was made up of, had a kind of structure to it that was, had a pattern built into it that allowed one to understand it through understanding those correlations. Now, this is not entirely unknown to the West either, obviously. And Paracelsus in the 15th century and the 16th century wrote the following. He said that the prose of the natural world should be read with attention to the mysterious details contained within it. We men, he wrote, discover all that is hidden in the mountains by signs and outward correspondences. And it is thus that we find out all the properties of the herbs and that is in stones. There is nothing in the depths of the seas, nothing in the heights of the firmament up in the stars that man is not capable of discovering. There is no mountain so vast it can hide from the gaze of man what is within it. It is revealed to him by corresponding signs. So this notion of a kind of a prose or a language to the natural world that one can read if one understands it is something we also find in the Western world. So let me begin then with the microcosmic or inner space. So we could begin with the body. In fact, the early Chinese mapping of the body is like a landscape. And very interestingly, Sergio's comments about water, the body is understood like a natural landscape where the veins are the rivers that run throughout that, what he was referring to as these lines and that the waterways correspond to. And indeed, they understand the body as an instantiation of nature, where the eyes are the sun and the moon, your nose is the mountain, your hairs are the stars, and so on. But even more interestingly, they understand that the organs of the body, the viscera, actually have corresponding locations in the stars, and in fact are inhabited by deities that live within those organs. So this correlate, you can see in this diagram here, even the waning and waxing phases of the moon surrounding the outside of it. It's a really fascinating diagram, but too complex to go into. But in any case, the body and the landscape have these distinct correlations to them. Now, this may seem like an odd picture to show in a talk like this, but I thought it would be one way to get into this issue of the microcosm and the macrocosm in a way that is perhaps a little different than what you might be expecting. So this is just a very famous Taoist painting. What I want to focus on is this gourd or calabash that is on his attached to his waist here, where some of you may think that this is, and indeed they were used for this at some times, is to put your water or wine in there for when you go off into the mountains. But actually, these are far more important symbolically and related to these conceptions of space. So this is, in Chinese, they call it a hulu, very nice calabash. But you might wonder why this was considered to be such a special thing within a religious tradition and related to space. Well, it's the nature of the shape of the calabash itself, with the two bicameral sections to it that are neatly divided. And in fact, they understood this as the physical manifestation of yin and yang principles, with each of the compartments representing one of those. Thus, the calabash itself represented the entire unit, getting back to the unity of prior to its separation. In fact, it joined it. So in fact, the calabash is a universe unto itself. And therefore, it's no surprise that we find some very interesting artwork and images from early China that show immortals at the end of the day, after having a long day of work, disappearing back into their calabashes, like this immortal going back into his world that's inside the gourd. And then my favorite image of all time from Japan, showing the calabash with the immortal and his bottles of wine, and just enjoying the leisure and the wonders of living inside of that at the primal beginning of it all. It's a kind of it's very much a utopia, in which we know etymologically means no space. It's he's back to that space before things became differentiated. So the gourd then serves as this microcosm of everything, of the entire universe, and that's captured inside of it. Now, let me shift now to a slightly different domain, which is that of caves. And again, we find in going all the way back to Homer's Odyssey, a very interesting description of caves, which are always depicted as these very special kind of locations that have powers to them, treasures that might be hidden within, even dangers associated with them. But this one, I think, is very interesting, how he says, at the head of the harbor, there is an olive tree with spreading leaves. Nearby is a cave that is shaded and pleasant and sacred to the nymphs, who are called the nymphs of the Wellsprings. naiads, and there is water forever flowing. There we go, Sergio, the necessity of water there. It has two entrances, one of them facing the north wind where people can enter, but one toward the south wind has more divinity. That is why the way of the immortals, and no men enter by that. So this notion that the caves are entered by not by humans or mortals, but by deities or spirits that have access to those. In China, I just mentioned this one category of a very interesting type of caves within the Taoist tradition that are literally called the Dongtian, or a cavern heaven. And so the Taoist tradition had different sets of these, but what's interesting about them is I show you the map here of the 10 major and 36 minor of these grotto heavens or cavern heavens. The mythology or the stories about them is that you could enter into one in one part of China and emerge somewhere else, that they were connected in a subterranean way. And so we have this story here about this character, Lu Qiu Fang Yuan, who once made the entire underground walk from Dadi Cavern Heaven, that's number 1 up here, which I have circled, to Huayang and back, and that's number 9 over here. So this is a huge stretch. This is like from Xi'an all the way to down to Shanghai. Inside this subterranean conduit, he is said to have come upon an extraordinary world full of flowers and trees, inhabited by dragons and other miraculous animals, where dragon effigies have been cast by envoys from successive dynasties. So these caves, and this is a painting of looking into one of those types of caves, here had these stalactites that hang down from them that drip water, which were thought to be a kind of special essence that the immortals could live upon by entering into them. And so one of the places that I did some research in Hunan province is this one, and this is a very interesting kind of a map, or which has no relationship to the topography if you go there. But one section of it on the right here has something called the śūnyatā, or the water curtain cave, and this is the grotto heaven of that location. And these were conceived to open up into kind of an immortal landscape and contain everything inside of it. Now, I'll shift to Japan briefly here to discuss a very interesting kind of natural form of landscape around the sort of northeastern side of Mount Fuji, which everybody is familiar with. Around the northeast side are a number of lakes called the Fujiko, or Fuji Lakes. And as most of you know, Mount Fuji is a volcanic mountain, and it has no rivers that flow down it, but water percolates down through it, and it exits at the bottom through some massive lava tubes that look like this. These are natural forms that drain water out into the lakes. So throughout Japanese religion, these lava tubes were treated very much like the caves in China, and interpreted actually as the passageways that lead into, literally, this is the into the tainai. This is the into the body of the female, going into her womb, actually. And so the idea was that one would enter into these and have a kind of rebirth experience, a born again experience, where one emerged as somebody changed. So this is what it looks like in practice, and these are some really wonderful images from woodcuts of the tainai, going into the body of the mountain through these caves. And then you can see the yamabushi, or these mountain ascetics, drinking the water dripping off the stalactites as if they were nursing at the breasts of the mother of the mountain. And so these were conceived to be very potent places for getting in touch with this other side of the world. There you can see what it looks like. So what's significant here, I think, is this conception that sacred landscapes or space, again, wasn't just this notion of a kind of naturally appearing site that's empty of things, but actually it's what's in it that makes it what gives it its sacrality. So this very interesting text from Liu Yuxi, a very famous Tang Dynasty poet. In his Lo Shiming, he wrote this line that says, "Mountains are not famous due to their heights, but because transcendents live there. Waters are not numinous because of their depth, but because dragons live there." And I think this is, to me, very interesting, first of all, just for our thinking about why is it that certain mountains are considered to be sacred is not just due to their kind of topographical features and their heights, but actually due to the things inside of them. And in China, this can be just even a botanical variety can signal a sacred space as well. So the interesting thing about the caves then, though, that I wanted to note at this microcosmic level is this line that says that beneath the grotto heavens, a separate sun and moon dispense their light and turn to shine within. So the idea is that one enters into a kind of an alternative universe there that has its own connection with the sun and the moon that are on the inside. And that then invites us to head out to outer space and look at the macrocosmic level. So I'd like to begin, with this notion of looking actually to the stars, and in an attempt, we live in a society nowadays where it's very different than in the pre-modern period, where the stars and looking up at the sky really mattered in thinking about people's place in the landscape and in the universe. And I think with the bright lights of our cities and our modern lifestyles, it's not something we do much anymore, but it was very significant. In an earlier attempt to counteract a tendency towards ahistorical or ungrounded approaches to sacred geography or study of the landscape, I once wrote of the need for historians of religion to concentrate on what is on the ground under their feet. In making that point, I discussed the Greek myth of Thales, who lived in the 7th to the 6th century BCE, who, while contemplating the stars high above, fell into a well. In fact, this is the discovery of water, according to Greek mythology. So upon seeing this, a Thracian slave woman laughed and then reprimanded Thales for having his head in the sky and not observing what was directly under his own feet. To the Greeks, this story exhibited their dilemma of a theorist who loses their grounding. After spending more time reading other local sources, however, it became clear to me that keeping to the ground might result in missing an important element of Chinese conceptions of space. While I still hold to the important perspective that the theorist Michel Desserteaux has put so nicely, that history begins at ground level with footsteps, it's equally important to ponder the skies above, even if this means falling into a few wells along the way. So let's look to the sky for a minute. And again, beginning even in Europe, one of the most fascinating books I read some years ago was this book called The Sun in the Church on Cathedrals as Solar Observatories, which shows the sophisticated knowledge, particularly in the 18th century, of architects and church architects who were caught up in a moment when they were trying to calculate when Easter was, and realized that, and this is why they're in churches, in order to try to decide and pin down the date of Easter. So we find in churches, on the floors of the churches, a hole in the roof that lets the sun in, and then these diagrams on the floor, which allow them to monitor the passage of the sun across the floor, and they can identify when the equinox is, and so on. And so the church as an architectural feature became a way to say something about the pinning down the calendrics. Now, this is an image of the site I showed you before in the woodblock print, where one of those cavern heavens was. And interestingly, when we look at the text that's associated with this place, kind of a geographical text, it doesn't begin with the landscape, but it begins, and this confused me for a very long time. The first pages are of the asterisms and constellations that are above the site, and there's a kind of a mirroring relationship between the spatial location and what lies above it. So the text that goes with it says, of the 28 lunar mansions in the sky above, the brilliances of E, or the wings, these are different asterisms, and Jun fly above the mountain. There are a myriad of resplendent pines with treetops reaching into the sky. The waters are azure and the cliffs are frosty white, nourishing pure clouds and mushrooms. And another text then very interestingly makes the same kind of correlation between the stars and the land, and said the boundaries of every square inch correspond to the celestial divisions on high. The relation between the phenomenon in the heavens and the physical features of the earth can thus be brilliantly seen. So this, what we tend to think of as separations in China, were integrally related to each other, thinking about what's on the land and what's in the sky above. And we see this in some really fascinating maps, if you will. These are what are known as the true forms of the mountains. And this is the one for a very famous mountain called Taishan. And nobody quite knows what the vantage point of representation of space here is. It has almost no relationship to the actual topography of the site. And I'll show you, here's one more. This is actually the same site as the image, that reddish color satellite image I showed you of this place in Hunan, Nanyue. And this one, though, it has, as Sergio was talking about, these are waterways that are traversing it here. These are caves and caverns that are being represented with the waterways, again, never ending, but going through the entire site. And these were meant to be painted in with different colors, with red and yellow. And there are certain direction things that say, enter, ascend here for herbs, or ascend here for particular medicines. But we don't know. Some people thought these were early kind of topographical maps, adopting a view from the stars and looking down on it from above. But again, it doesn't match up, and it would have been difficult to have such a perspective. Others believe that this is actually an internal view of the mountain, as if we're inside of one of those caves and looking at it from the inside. In any case, they're really fascinating kind of representations of space that still confound scholars of actually what the orientation is. So let's go back up into the stars and look at Japan. So Sergio was talking a lot about gardens and the kind of controlled spaces of built environment. I want to spend a few minutes on what you might think of as a kind of large-scale natural landscaping, if you will, based on Buddhist principles. So this is, as you can see here, the main island of Japan, Honshu here. And what we're going to look at is related to something called the womb mandala. And this is not from the Zen tradition, but the esoteric Buddhist tradition. Some of you may be familiar with these kinds of images from Tibetan Buddhism, but these are meant to be a kind of representation of reality, of the entire universe, and captured in a single image with the Buddha residing in the center of it. Now, these were meant to be these were not meant to be appreciated as aesthetic objects, but they were used for meditation. So in esoteric meditation practice, one is supposed to move through mentally through this mandala like this. I tried to give you an overlay for it. And as you entered in the bottom down here, and you greeted each of the deities, recited their mantra, that is to say, a kind of sacred utterance, and you adopted a hand gesture as you recited that. So you combined your mental image of meditation, a bodily practice, and sound. So body, speech, and mind are combined in this. And you work your way all the way through it and exit out the top when the meditation is done. Now, the cool thing in Japan is that on this peninsula here that's known as Yoshino and Kumano, the Buddhist practitioners mapped that mandala over this massive geographic space as if the landscape itself was the mandala. So if you can imagine for a minute, as we zero in, here's a closer image of it. Imagine that mandala hanging up in the sky like a slide, with the sun being the bulb of a slide projector and projecting the image onto the ground. this is exactly what the Buddhists did, and projected there's two mandalas, the diamond and the womb mandala, projected that onto the landscape, such that the religious practitioners, as a form of practice, they literally hiked this entire trail from Yoshino all the way out to Kumano or Nachi, where there's actually a famous temple. And by doing this, you passed through the mandalas on the ground, literally, in some cases marked where the deities are in the mandala, with statues that are placed in the landscape. And it's just a really fascinating thing to think that this form of mapping from adopting this position from the sky and being able to project that on the ground. Now this, although the title for this evening is through the kaleidoscope, in fact, the Chinese term that they use to translate it is langjing, which the Chinese speakers will know actually means a prism. And I actually think prism works quite well for this connotation that we've just seen of projecting the mandala onto the geographic space. And so, so that part of it, I think, works really interestingly. But I'm also fascinated by the notion of the English term of a kaleidoscope, which is known in Chinese as a wanhuatong, which literally means the 10,000 flowers tube. That really nice, actually kind of captures it very well. And these were, kaleidoscopes were only invented in the 19th century. In 1816 was the first invention of those. But fascinatingly, the early invention of the kaleidoscope quickly went to Japan. Within 3 years of its invention, they already had them in Japan. And it was called a hyaku-iro megane, or a mirror tube of 100 colors, is how the Japanese treated it. And this is actually the very first kaleidoscope that ever made its way to Japan. And so this notion then of the kaleidoscope or the prism, what does it allow us if we look through this? We might see an image kind of like this, a kind of kaleidoscopic series of dots or flowers or other very interesting patterning that we might see. But the interesting thing about a kaleidoscope is that it needs to be pointed to the sun or the light to work best in order. So you have to have sunlight or point it up to the sky to get that bright light. And it presents something beautiful. Literally, the term kaleidoscope is derived from the ancient Greek word kalos, or beauty, and also eidos, that is form or shape. And then the final part of kaleidoscope, the scope part, is scopio, to look at. So it literally means something, the observation of beautiful forms, to look at beautiful things. But the Buddhist side of it is kind of interesting, because a kaleidoscope is based on the fact that you have to destroy that image. You have to shake it up and break it down in order for something new to come into view. And that is perhaps that one sees something else and sees something beautiful. And I think there's a message for all of us as academics in the ways that we think about space here, is that sometimes what happens is we need to shake up our preconceptions and shake up those models that we use, and not to freeze them in any one form, but to constantly challenge ourselves with outside views about anything we study, but in this case in particular, our conceptions of space. There's something important about shaking ourselves out of our ways of thinking in order to see something differently and in a new light, and perhaps even something beautiful along the way. Thank you very much. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, James. That is very incredible presentation. And also, Sergio, you have a very inspiring presentation there. And let's move on to the discussion panel. Maybe you guys will have this conversations across each other's. So I'll just let you guys talk.
Okay.
Thank you, Jesse. That was very, very nice, James. Like really wonderful. I love the drawings of the caves. Like really, really incredible. I don't know if if you have any initial thoughts, or I have like one or two, but I wonder if you have any that you would like to share.
No, why don't you go first, Sergio? I was thinking, I had thought of this kind of after the fact, though, that the cave, and particularly those lava tubes, it uses the same term of a tong as it's kind of like a kaleidoscopic thing itself as well. But anyway, that's kind of just an interesting kind of phenomenon of the same term. But anyway, why don't you start? And I have a few things I jotted down that I'd love to ask you about as well. But why don't you begin?
I thought that there's like two things that I really enjoy about the lecture, two ideas that you were putting on the table. The one is a universe unto itself. Mm-hmm. This expression that, which I think we can actually like see very spatialized in different forms, even in urbanism or in buildings, that a building always carries the idea of the city within itself. That everything is a center unto itself. And I think that that's like a very powerful question. And so the fact that I wasn't aware that was like actually a spatial expression of an ancient cosmology. So I'm like really fascinated with that idea. Mm-hmm. The fact that one would think about currently one would be able to like see spatial patterns that are still connected to those questions. So that was the first thing. The other one that I thought that was like very interesting, which was when you were talking about the aim is to reach spatial undifferentiatedness or chaos, mm-hmm. Which I think it's like always a very fascinating question for any designer. We are, as I was saying before, there's always any kind of social development brings with it a new host of types of spaces and a fragmentation of the existing ones. And so there's like this constant tendency within to see more and more specialization. And so the fact that there is like a counterforce to that, so to speak, and that is actually to a certain extent in the framework that you were talking about, ancient, and like there's like an ancient or like aim or cosmological idea. I thought that was like also like very, very beautiful. In fact, that one can resist or attempt to invent a new type of space that counters the specialization that is demanded from people at this moment in time by actually going back to some primordial cosmological idea. Mm-hmm. So that is like, I don't think within Western thought we have that. We have that ambition or that idea expressed so clearly. And that was like a very interesting question. And so I thought that these were like two things that I think are very, very fascinating. I don't know if there's, I would, as I was saying at the beginning, when Jesse asked me like, what do you want to lecture about, or how do we can make an event about these questions? I thought I'm always interested in how people coming from different cultural traditions would be able to instrumentalize their own understandings in a creative, innovative manner. And I many times feel as a teacher, as an instructor, that we are in some cases imposing a particular Western ideal or a particular Western frame of reference that might prevent others from emerging. And the ones that you're like these two in particular that you were pointing out, the aim to reach a spatial undifferentiatedness and a universe unto itself seem to very, very powerful ideas that I could see clearly instrumentalized or used within current spatial frameworks, but maybe that's not a possibility within our Western way of thinking. So that was like my immediate reaction to some of the things that you were like talking about. Yeah,
no, I think it's you can see how this can work in the opposite direction too, where the certain kind of Western categories that we are so familiar with or that we're stuck in thinking with then inhibit us. They work as blinders for being unable to see things, or you have the problematic kind of preconceptions that are read into the material, even though they don't necessarily apply so perfectly. So that's why I gave the example, particularly of the landscape and mountains, because we glorify in the West the heights of mountains and thinking of these glorious, even though it's a very late phenomenon in the Western world, actually, to think of them in that way. In the pre-modern period, they were also feared places. But if that's what you're looking for, and I'll be very honest, that's what I first thought about when I began looking at spatial conceptions in China and Japan. But then it became very clear that that was exactly the wrong way to be looking at these things. In fact, it became so obvious, because why would this one mountain site that's not even the highest one on the landscape then be separated off as the one that's treated as a kind of very special place rather than the one that's the highest? So, and you touched on this in terms of particularly the Western romanticization of that took place in the 1960s and 70s with D.T. Suzuki and that crowd of Westerners, and the ideas that spread about Zen in the West, and the problems that has created for Westerners to really understand Zen in a way that's different than the kind of Orientalist sort of understanding of Zen and the way it was created, and that's created its own problems for Western practitioners, but also for thinking about the place of Zen within Japanese religions more generally. And I really like this your discussion of the kind of fragmentation, separation of the architectural styles was really, to me, something I hadn't really thought much about, just in terms of that distinction that develops over time. And one of the, I guess my first thought was, if one was to think of that in a kind of Zen philosophical or doctrinal way, could it be that certain types of architectural features were being used like koans, in a sense of a visual koan that disturbs, that kind of unsettles one, because there's a breakage or blockage even of things that are built into the landscape. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, if that's even a possibility or not. And even more generally, I guess one of the problems that I always have is when you deal with these large kinds of topics that are, say, drawn from religious or philosophical traditions, particularly ones where it's, the whole representation of the entire universe, or even chaos, or whatever it is. How does one actually either instantiate that in a built environment, say in architecture or in a landscape design, right? And that's always confounded me, how to think through that, the actual representation. Anyway, those are just a few quick thoughts to maybe send it back your direction for a few ideas.
I think that these issues that I have like three things that I want to say. Like the first one is, like, I would really like to hear, maybe like in the Q&A, like some of the students' thoughts and reactions to the questions that you were putting forward when we were discussing these two questions, and how you were arguing that, Western frames of reference might prevent us from really understanding some of these questions. And so particularly East Asian students that are being educated under two traditions, both, like, they have been educated in China or in other countries of East Asia, and now they're also being educated in the West, in this particular case in the US. I would really like to hear from them how they see these questions, because I mean, they could be a moment of tension or confusion or difficulty, but it can also be a moment of incredible creativity and richness and sophistication. So I thought that was like very interesting. In relation to the two questions that you were bringing up, like one is the fragmentation as a potential koan or disruption. I thought that was like, I had never thought about it that way. I've always, my only understanding of this fragmentation within the Japanese garden that appears in Zen temples was that there might have been some relationship to the idea of here and now as like fundamental in the Zen meditation practices, and so like it's like is the awareness of this precise moment in time without a concern for the historic past or the future, but understanding them as all colliding into one single moment. And I thought that maybe was like this kind of like definition of a bracket was maybe a way of like thinking about it. I think that other people have looked at it in that way. I think like John Cage, for example, who really was like maybe at that moment in time influenced by a lot of these ideas. Also in his artistic practice, I think that there's a lot of moments that are bracketed in particular ways, like 433 or many of the others. So I always thought that maybe that fragmentation was like, that's how I would understand it from a doctrinal point of view, although that's like very difficult to discuss. But I think this idea of like it being a koan or like a something that produces like a moment of where logical thought is not possible or is not useful to really understand the insight of reality. I think that that's like very interesting. I think it would be like quite a fascinating project to think about this, even to like maybe give to the students as an academic exercise, like the lack of not the impossibility to use rational thought in order to do this. And I think there have been examples. I remember like there was a very famous exercise that we were given. This was actually in Spain in my undergraduate. Like one of the teachers would come in and they would say like, okay, draw the spirit of a hen or a chicken. And it was like, you would be like, oh, right, like what on earth does that even mean? Like how, so there is like this kind of like strange, like difficulty to understand it from a rational point of view. I don't know if that is the case of these gardens, but I think it would be interesting to thought about it that way. Mm-hmm. And then the other question that you were bringing up, this is I don't think we think about cosmological ideas within urban or garden or building space when we're thinking within Western traditions at this moment in time. And I think that this also has to do with what we were discussing before we went on the air, when we were talking about the influence or lack of influence of religious thought within current contemporary ideals. I think that we have a tendency to think of this in secular terms, in a lot of, because in many cases, there is an alignment, or there wants to be an alignment with progressive social and political ideas, and that typically implies a certain secularization. And so I find it very difficult to I think it's very rare that we see religion being brought onto projects in a deeply meaningful way, not in a kind of like political discussion or in opposition. But I find that that's like much more possible within other East Asian traditions because of that possibility. And so I think that would be like, so I think that there have been like quite a lot of people that talk about, the universe unto itself, the idea that any building or any part of a city actually has a complete idea of the cosmos because of the way it is designed, as a set of rings or as a set of other spatial structures that actually reflect a broader understanding of the cosmos. And so there is maybe in this case it's like a little bit structural, but there is like an understanding of the cosmos as a spatial model that gets used as an organizational principle within a particular confined space, whether it's a building or a garden or like a part of a city. I think that there's like lots of examples within Chinese traditional, particularly like city making practices. I don't think we talk about it it's not that we talk about it. I don't think anyone would dare to talk about it in this manner in current Western design practices. But again, that's like something that troubles me. Maybe like some East Asian students would like to actually approach certain design questions in that manner, but within the Western academy, that's probably not something that they would like, or they might feel comfortable approaching because of the way that things are framed. And so like this is precisely that question that you're bringing up is one of the things that is maybe troubling or like makes me uncomfortable, that I think that we aim for an international reputation, but actually, or a global presence. And we aim to like accept and recruit international students, but actually we are under a very specific Western model or model of Western thought. And a lot of these questions are only thought of in historic terms, but not actually in terms that are implementable or usable or instrumental at this moment in time. So this is like something that I don't know if this is an issue that you see in your field, or this is something that is that I don't know that is more that belongs to other fields. How do you see this in your area?
Well, not so much, a little bit. I mean, what one of the reasons why I asked the question is that we're kind of at this an interesting moment. I think some of these attempts to draw back on one's own traditions within, particularly in East Asia, we've seen it go full circle in Japan, where on the one hand you have a movement to try to adopt what they think are the grand standards of the West, and then you get adoption of certain styles of doing things, then reflected very clearly in architecture and other modes of adopting what are perceived to be Western principles in order to be a fully modernized nation and so on. But then you get a reaction to that often to say, wait, we have resources and traditions of our own that should be drawn upon. And then you get interesting examples of kind of going back to that. And China's at an interesting moment now, I think, of this, where with a very rapid modernization and urbanization that's going on, with some really fantastic, just incredible architecture that as you're, I'm sure everybody's aware of, that's being done now. But is there a danger then of losing or trying to mimic a kind of Western style of things? I mean, I think we all can remember some of the bad examples of, trying to adopt kind of Renaissance style things to China that, stand out in some places. But there's I think a real, importance of trying to remind themselves of these traditional practices that can be drawn on, or traditional ideas that might also be very powerful, I would think, for as a kind of comforter, I guess, with the turn to modernity and not just feeling as if one has to kind of mimic or follow what the West had done and actually adopt those. I think, this is obviously what we'll see what happens in China, but I think we've seen similar examples in Korea and Japan for that matter of where there at a certain point you get enough kind of at a certain level of success where one can then start to draw on one's own traditional types of either ideas or inspirations for things as well. And I think it applies to approaches for how to think about landscape in general as well. So we'll see if that ever takes off in China, to try to dip back into these as well. But it's quickly, a lot of it is lost, actually. I mean, along the way, and this is, we're at a danger, I think, of some of that happening with rapid modernization. And I think when you have a turn to sort of folk movements like we had in Japan with the Mingei movement, and going back and learning about, kind of farmhouse style, and then integrating that into kind of modern architecture or adapting temple styles and things like that, it can be really, I think, inspirational and creative. So the one, if you wouldn't mind, also, one of the things which I was really glad that you pointed out was looking at Shinto in addition to Buddhism here, and also in pointing out that connection. This is another one of those incredible Western thought barriers that we just have had a very hard time getting over, because in the West, we separate, religion is always separated into very clear churches, and you have your Catholics, you have your Protestants, you have Islam and Judaism, and these are very separate traditions. The important thing in Japan particularly is that in the pre-modern period, Buddhism and Shinto were a single institution. They were joint, and so there's no surprise then to see the kind of combination of Buddhist Shinto elements in the gardens going back, because the separation happens in 1868 only when Shinto and Buddhism are forcibly separated. So you know, in the pre-modern period, you had Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples right next to each other with shared elements to them. So it's kind of interesting, actually. And then they were forced to choose which direction to go, and then you would have, because Shinto was on the rise in terms of nationalistic movements as in the later period, then a lot of the Buddhist temples were destroyed, unfortunately. And but you can see these vestiges of the influence on each other in terms of the architecture, and also, as you pointed out really nicely there, I thought, with Shinto elements in the garden as well. So that was really, I thought, a very important kind of element to point out there, that again, we couldn't, you know, from our perspective, or from a Western perspective, would be very difficult to sort of see that just like I was trying to point out with kind of Buddhist and Taoist stuff coming together, which we tend to think of as always needing to be separate because of our church kind of structural thinking about these as separate institutions. You actually brought that up in terms of Shinto. And finally, there's been so much focus on kind of landscape, but more, at least for people doing studies of East Asia, on mountains, and waters have been the thing that have been totally forgotten about. And so I was really glad to see you bring that in as an important part of landscape design. In fact, mountains and waters always go together, and you know, Chinese people will know this when we talk about landscape paintings. It's shanxue, right? Mountains and waters, but water often kind of drops away. And these was really an important part of the overall kind of conception of geography, but also in terms of, as you pointed out, in gardens. And these were, you know, those were used for, you know, poetry gatherings where they would float, you know, cups of wine down them, and you had to compose a verse, and they were just really integrated in very interesting ways in all kinds of practices. But anyway, water has been the big, I think, because I'm not sure if in the West, you know, there hasn't been a whole, you know, in say medieval Europe, when you think about writing about either landscape and architecture, is water something that people have focused on much? Because in East Asia, it's just been kind of a blind spot, I would have to say, even though it's centrally important. So anyway, I was glad you brought it up. It's a really important part of it.
That's very interesting that you're saying, because like there's like this very famous, like I think it comes from one of these koans, and I believe that this from the Tang or the Song dynasty, where it's like mountains are mountains, rivers are rivers, and there's like this kind of like the trying to emphasize the nature of things, and then they said like, but mountains are not mountains and rivers are not rivers, and there's like again like there's like the bridging or the intermingling of things, and the two elements that they always use are mountains and rivers, so mountain and water. And so I've always understood that the emergence of Chan Buddhism or Zen Buddhism in China was actually like deeply connected to Taoism. That one would not be able to really talk about Chan Buddhism all the way back to like what they call the first patriarch in the Bodhidharma, that was like deeply related to Taoist principles. And so I've always understood that. And it was very interesting to see this, that actually the cosmologies are also like deeply integrated. It's not just a matter of principles, of way of thinking, of practices, but actually, or ethical principles, but actually that the way that the world is understood, the cosmos as a whole is understood, they're like deeply interconnected. I thought that was like very interesting. And the microcosmos and the macrocosmos, that's like very, very, very beautiful, very ecological in essence. Again, like these are also like like the fact that that cosmology exists, like would be like really interesting in the context of climate change, to really resort to this, to recuperate or resort to these ideas, which I think could be interesting. Again, I don't think it's possible to think about it in these terms within progressive secular society. Like we like tend to resist that.
Yeah.
I think it would be like very interesting for some students to probably approach it from that point because they feel a deep connection. So that I thought that was like very, very powerful question.
Yeah, that you can see the resistance already that happened. You know, there was a movement back in the 1970s, which was called deep ecology, right? And you probably heard about it, which was inspired a lot by, you know, by the Buddhist tradition, Taoist tradition, you know, and it was, you know, it just, it was never taken as a serious kind of an approach to ecology, even though, you know, some people didn't go quite overboard on the kind of Orientalist interpretation of it. But I actually, you know, I've given some talks in China where I was trying to, you know, dealing with environmental problems in China these days and addressing climate change and everything is as we know, just an incredibly important and huge issue, not just globally, of course, but really particularly in China as well. And so, but rather than come in with sort of Western answers of that we have it all figured out and we can kind of use our science to get out of this, you know, are there resources in the past to draw on that actually might be more applicable to the situation in China, or people might adapt to it rather than being told by Westerners what to do, but to say, hey, you have your own resources and your own tradition to draw on. And I think, you know, some of it comes out of this sort of thinking just about conceptions of space and nature that are already there, that one can draw on perhaps as principles for addressing that. So yeah, it's I think one possibility, but it you know, it had its moment in the West and didn't quite ever really take off. But just because of the dangers of actually misinterpretation and orientalizing things, or kind of essentializing the East as something other, as this kind of mystical place and all of that, as you know. So.
But I think it would be like, I mean, still like probably like an opportunity for East Asian students, maybe not from that might feel, as you were saying, like that might feel a deep connection to pre-modern traditions as a way of like approaching or like having to like face modern contemporary problems. Like that's like very, very interesting. So I wonder, yeah, Jesse, should we open?
Yeah, come to bring some students in, yeah.
Right, shall we just open up to for the questions to the students? So firstly, I have some comments like for myself, because I was educated in the US for my undergrad degree, so I might not have too much influences with the kind of Chinese ideology about space. Thinking about water for their usage in Western, all I can think of is the water used in Bellante or in this the acai. It's more, I feel like water in the Western culture is more about like the show off of prestige, or because I feel like the water used in that time is very scarce, so it's kind of like a representation of power, rather than in China is more of kind of like a representing the ideology of like birth or rebirth. I don't know if that's the linkage. Yeah.
And since I educated in China for my undergraduate study, and for the first class of our landscape theory, our professor told us like the original style of writing the garden, that is yuan. It is formed with the earth or mountains, and also water, plants, and the world outside. So it shows how important it is for water and also plants, mountains, or to the gardens or landscape in China. Yeah, and it's a comment from me. And I also I see that Liwei has a question.
Can I actually add on to your thoughts? Yeah, it's because I was trying to translate, just like working translations about like Chinese writings about gardens. And I think in the Western education, we are taught to think about programming first. So the space are kind of organized in a logical sense. But when I was translating the Chinese writings about the gardens, especially the scholars' gardens, they doesn't have that logical compositions. All they have is just like a personal, like a journey through the landscape. And the spaces might not actually attach to each other. They're just like, I don't know, collages. So that's the thing that is very different actually for me to actually see both ideologies.
And it reminds me of one case in points for the relationship between the stars and land. So from my perspective, from the exhibition when I joined in China, it says there has some connection between the location of stars. Like one of the most famous is the Ziweixing, the location of stars and the planning for the Forbidden City in Beijing. And yeah, I think it's quite interesting, and I really like to know more of this examples. And I wonder whether like it is still meaningful to like use this kind of perception of a stars or cosmos to affect today's urban planning or urban design or landscape practice.
I have no idea if it has any kind of impact now, in terms of the thing. Is just to say that in the pre-modern period, people were very attentive to what was going on in the night sky and in the sky more generally too. So there was all kinds of divination based on cloud patterns and everything. And so we've become kind of unidimensional and looking down at our feet rather than up in the sky. And it's not just any single location, but this pattern, as you mentioned, with the Forbidden City, is something you find all over China. The connection, just really briefly on water is in power. I would say, water has always been power in China as well, Jesse. Think of the earliest, you go all the way back to the Han Dynasty, and there's this water controlling project done by Li Bing out in Sichuan, which was to control the headwaters of the Huanghe, of the Yellow River, which was a major, complete landscape reorientation to channel those powerful waters. And then you think of the PRC government, attempting to dam the Yangtze River, right? That's like the ultimate power move, is to control that, and so controlling water has always been a kind of political prerogative as well. But I'll go ahead and turn it over to, I think, Liwei Shen is the next question.
Thank you for professors. Thank you for your lectures. That was very beautiful. All of the literatures, images, and the references, they are so beautiful. Thank you so much. And my question was like, when I was wondering, going through your presentations, and I was thinking, I agreed all of the things you said. What came into my mind is that I always think like there are very beautiful traditions, cosmologies, or stuffs happening in the East Asia countries or the territories. However, I feel like, what if the modern people don't believe in that anymore? And that becomes a very serious problem in my mind for a very long time. Like Yes, we have a very complete Taoist cosmologies in the past. However, now we may, when we selected a construction site for an important building, we might use feng shui theories to select this site, but it was a sort of a fragmented ideology, more of a superstitious belief about that, but not an institutionalized stuff. I think one of the reasons is that the technology makes people to not believe in the phenomena of the sky visually anymore. And the other questions might be because the local religions or the local traditions, those sort of associations might potentially become a replacement of the centralized regime. So that is an inherent contradictory situations between two of them. And actually, while we are facing the real project nowadays, for example, based in China, we are inevitably facing this sort of fragmented situations that is kind of completely different from the past Taoist cosmologies with utopian imaginations, with some beautiful topographical understandings of landscapes anymore. So I wonder if how should we deal with sort of issues, or yeah.
Very well said. That was actually really interesting to hear, Li Wei. I'm not sure if I should answer or Sergio should, but
go ahead.
It is interesting though that you're right about technology, but that's also, these are not always oppositional. So for example, even in Japan today, before you build a building, there is a land pacifying rite that's still done, either that brings in the priest onto the land, and they will rope it off ahead of time, and in order to, prior to construction beginning, in order to quell the spirit of the place and pacify it so that it doesn't get angry during the construction project. And one of the great examples of this is the very famous museum that I'm sure this was the Miho Museum, which probably all of you know. The I.M. designed a fantastic museum along near Lake Biwa. And if you watch there's a nice movie that was done of the building of that site, where, interestingly, done in a nature preserve, that what's out there, they actually dismantled the mountain and numbered every plant and put it aside, and then they reconstructed it back on top. It's something like 80% of the building is underground, and all the plants were replaced. But prior to that construction beginning, they call it a Chinkonsai, the settling of the spirit there, and they did a whole ritual out on the site there. So anyway, there's, in at least in Japan, there's a kind of a combination of these two. What I'm more interested in, and I guess it's not necessarily drawing explicitly on Buddhist or Taoist ideas, say in contemporary architecture or even in landscape design, of specific things that one might find. But I think what Sergio was getting at is, are there even some kind of conceptual schemes or ideas that can still be useful to draw on, that would not be kind of constrained by the same kinds of, say, just drawing on traditional elements or something like that, but actual philosophical or doctrinal principles that could still be. I think you opened up, right, Sergio, with this notion of, are there ways to integrate, say, East Asian or Asian or from anywhere, ideas into a Western curriculum, and what might be resources for some kinds of new inspiration or opportunities for innovation and inspiration for students. And I think, that wouldn't be precluded, I would think it could generate some new ideas and new thinking, and like I was trying to say at the end, to shake up the kaleidoscope a little bit and see things differently. But
yeah, maybe I know Li Wei very well, so maybe.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, maybe we should move on with Shishuan has another question.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Sergio and James. The presentation was really fascinating, and I actually find this question of leveraging the idea of void and nothingness in the East Asian sense into design really interesting. And I kind of have a thesis right now that I was took interest in this specific question as well. And also I find in this site, if we put our site in a Chinese setting, it has a lot of relevance, because I think this idea of void relating things together, and also this focus on the in-between spaces between the void and solid, I think in a way it's still deeply embedded in Chinese people's mind. And it's not only in the ecological sense, but also in the social sense. And one example is the Shikumen space in Shanghai, which is totally under Western planning, and they inserted this really figural street spaces into the housings, but the way people use it, the way Chinese people use it, is still they bring out their personal stuff to take on this alley space, which really transformed this alley space into a in-between space of the public and the private, or of the public and the personal. So I think it really shows the difference, the different perceptions of void in Eastern and Western culture. So I wonder if you also resonate with this social aspect of the Eastern sense of nothingness and void, and could maybe say more about this.
I think that typically within Western thought and traditions and the way that we are educated, emptiness and nothingness is typically seen as a concept that has bad connotations. We don't grow up thinking of these spatial ideas as something that is beneficial, or something that could benefit anyone in any way. And so, I mean, personally, for me, it has been a process of trying to understand this from other points of view. For example, void is typically understood as a vacuum. They're almost synonyms in the way that they're traditionally or culturally understood, when in reality that's not really the case. A vacuum is a particular, implies an absolute existence of nothing at all whatsoever. A void is typically a space that is devoid of some element, but not of everything. And so our understanding of emptiness, nothingness, void, vacuums is very, very basic, very primitive. There's no subtlety. There's no interesting differentiation in how we look at these things. There has been, at some moments in time, particularly in the past 25 years or so, renewed interest within the academy, particularly within urban design, architectural landscape, of thinking about these questions in a more subtle manner. But I think that culturally, our understanding of these ideas is very, 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 I would say, very pedestrian, not subtle in any way whatsoever. I think that from an Eastern point of view, particularly from an East Asian point of view, I think that there's a much broader subtlety and understanding of these questions in ways that I find much more interesting. I don't know, James, what your thoughts are on this issue.
Yeah, I was going to bring this up, and I'm really glad you brought it up, Zishuan, because we run into some terminological problems here with any kind of translation, obviously. And Sergio's already pointed out, some of the negative connotations that come along, even with the term, whether you're using emptiness, which is the most common term used to translate kong, which was the Sanskrit term śūnyatā, right, or within Buddhist philosophy. And that term doesn't mean empty in terms of nothingness. It doesn't mean anything like that at all. In fact, what it means is that things are empty of the qualities which we ascribe to them. In other words, it's not that that nothing exists or that nothing is there. It's pointing out that we we map ideas onto things and ascribe qualities to them, usually of permanence and other kind of endurance over time, and then that creates attachment, desire, all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't mean that they're clearly not saying that, and I think that really changes. And it also, I would say, the same holds for Taoist conceptions of whether you're going to call it the void or primordial chaos or whatever it is. In fact, the way that they describe that is it's not a void in terms of a negative sense that Sergio was pointing out as well, of emptiness and nothing there. It's actually everything is there. That's the whole point. It's full potential. It's before everything kind of explodes onto the scene. So you can actually flip it and say that it's actually more important to realize that it's where all potential is. And that's, I think, a real complete reorientation to it. And I think it maybe at a philosophical and kind of level as well, what you were saying about the use of the space in Shanghai as well is a very interesting kind of way of thinking then of these open spaces. Or I know that Sergio, I hesitate to say anything. I know he's written a whole book on the urban void and everything as well. So, but in a sense, what it is, that open space becomes rather than a wasteland or a nothingness there, it actually holds all potential for use value, for the creation of use of any kind, of new use, of surprising things. So this is one, I've always been interested in these kinds of open spaces. I think maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Sergio, but I think in either in architecture and landscape, they describe these as desire lines, where architects will plan walkways and things like that. We see it at Harvard even, where there's say a walkway between here and there, but people just do a different route and then across the lawn, and then that eventually becomes a kind of a trail, and it becomes solidified. So that, I think, shows the breakup of how an open space can have potential for other things as well. Anyway, that's how I would sort of think of it. But just the key is that the terms emptiness and nothingness are not really appropriate. We get caught in a problem because of our language.
Chen.
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Professor Robson and Professor Panaro, for this wonderful talks and this dialogue between two scholars, one from more design background and another from more like a historical and academic background. So my question is, I think related to both of the talks, but mostly probably towards Professor Robson. I was really struck by when you showed the two mandalas were mapped onto the landscape of Japan, and it seems like the kind of the boundary between the mental space and the physical space is really blurred in this action, and from my very basic knowledge about esoteric Buddhism, is it a very unique phenomenon related to kind of esoteric practice, or it's a kind of more general kind of a cognitive pattern in East Asia that the interior experience can be kind of easily translated into a kind of a physical experience in real landscape or real space? And if so, can Professor Robson talk more about cases especially in artificial or man-made landscape or man-made structure that kind of has shared the similar ways of thinking, kind of how if there's such kind of structure were designed in pre-modern period. Could you talk more about any cases in either Taoist or Buddhist structures?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Chen. That's an it's a really interesting question. And so this relation between mental space and physical space, I mean, this is, a fundamental part of a lot of kind of spatial analysis by theorists of space, trying to think about, how we represent conceptually spaces, how we live spaces, how we perceive it, and all of this. This is, classic Henri Lefebvre kind of stuff, the production of space sort of ideas. I've always been, really interested in this notion of not necessarily how do you represent a kind of conceptual space in a physical form, but how one applies kind of conceptual ideas to actual landscape and reads into it, and actually almost as if they're kind of grounded naturally in the idea for them. Interestingly, maybe this is the best way to respond to that, is that rather than thinking that they're mapping conceptual space onto actual space or physical space, what they actually are saying is that they're discovering principles that already existed, actually, that they're built. In other words, the structure of the Buddhist teachings are built into the landscape if you could see it correctly, right? That's the idea. And so Buddhist practice is cleansing your, as Aldous Huxley said, your doors of perception to allow you to see things in the proper way. And that's, that basically is what the counteraction of emptiness is to no longer to map problematic views or distorted views onto it, but to actually see things kind of like a mirror would reflect reality. You can now see it. So a lot of the work in Japan was really, done primarily by a scholar named Alan Grippard, who was a teacher of mine, who's retired now, but was really ahead of his time as somebody that was thinking about these kinds of correlations. And one of the other places is down in Kyushu, a really fascinating place that I worked on with him and translated some of the text. And it's called Kunisaki Peninsula, and it's a volcanic site. And it's really beautiful if you look on it on a topographic map. It's a perfectly conical site. And the way they read it, though, is as if it has 8 valleys to it, which correspond to the 8 scrolls in the Lotus Sutra, famous, the Miao Lianhua Fajing, this very famous text in East Asia, the Lotus Sutra. So they thought that that topographical area was exactly a representation of the Lotus Sutra, so different than esoteric Buddhism. So it shows that other traditions were doing it. And they actually put a stone marker, a little stone with an inscription of every character, 72,000 some characters in that text throughout the landscape. And as you walked, as the practitioners did their peregrination on the mountain, they literally walked through the Lotus Sutra and read it as you went on the landscape. So that's another, but it was kind of built into the landscape as well by the way that they read the topography. And I've seen it also in China too, where certain places will particularly, they'll look at the top of a mountain area, and if they can identify kind of 8 hills or something like that, some kind of 8 sections, then immediately that becomes a lotus flower, because a lotus has 8 petals, and therefore it's connected to usually to one of the schools of Buddhism called Tiantai Buddhism or Tendai in Japan. So you can see all these different groups are trying to kind of read perceptively the landscape to try to claim that it was already built into the structure of the cosmos, built into the structure of the nature of the natural world, and interpret it that way. It can be challenging sometimes to follow them, to be sure, to really see all of that. But nonetheless, that's another couple of examples that I can think of. Yeah. So.
Thank you, Professor Robson.
Sure.
For this very informative answer. Yeah, so it seems like it's more like a way of looking, because of the special kind of the unique way of religious thinking. So they kind of recognize a hidden pattern instead of like artificially constructing something according to this principle. And my second half of question is towards Professor Panero about Daisenging. So when I look at your really wonderful slides of Daisenging, is the and after I heard Professor Robinson's talk, I was kind of wondering if the kind of miniature landscape that constructed around the kind of religious space is it somehow related to a kind of religious interior experience? I mean, like a kind of a mental experience as well. Yeah, I'm wondering if you have any insights in this aspect.
Well, I think that there's like, let's say, two schools of thought. There's like people that argue that there is a relationship between the process of enlightenment and awakening and this type of landscapes. And there's another school of thought that argues that, as I was saying before, like, for example, Dr. Kuitert, who argues that the design of these landscapes has more to do with traditional landscape practices, painting practices, rather than with like a religious experience. I think that you can find enough references and bibliography and literature on both of those two camps. I think that they're clearly scenographic. They're meant to be experienced from the building. They're not meant to be inhabited. They're meant to be seen, looked at. They're typically connected one to another in some kind of story or representation or symbolism of a process. But in some cases, some of these landscapes are also, for example, I mean, maybe like the most abstract one, like Ryoanji. There's enough literature that of people that would argue that it is connected with some type of religious experience. But I don't know. I think that you can find enough literature on both camps, and you can make your own opinion. The Kumano Kodo, which is the pilgrimage site that James was referring to, is incredibly interesting, and Koya-san, which is maybe the heart of this esoteric type of Buddhism, is like from an architectural and landscape point of view, it's an incredible place to visit if you have the opportunity, if you're interested in questions of esoteric Buddhism, not just because of the natural beauty of the landscape, which is quite insane, but of the buildings and gardens that you can find there are like really absolutely breathtaking.
And also probably one of the world's largest graveyards, because everybody wants to be buried next to this founder of Kukai, who's in suspended kind of animation there as a living Buddha. The interesting thing, Sergio, about the Daiseining is that, and when you look at the woodblock print that I showed of the kind of, there's a kind of artificial, how would I put it, exaggeration of verticality in Chinese representations of space, which is striking, I think, to everyone. When you look at landscape painting or woodcuts, very much a kind of verticalization of all of the different elements. And you see that, I think, in the gardens as well, with the way that rocks are stood up and done in many of those. And the Daiseining is an interesting one because the Daiseining in Chinese is a Da Xianyuan, the great immortals garden, actually, or the great immortals. So I've always wondered about that. It always struck me as such a kind of, it has just a very Chinese feel to it, in that sense of when I look at it, you could almost, if you took one of the pictures and turned it from color into black and white, it would look like a landscape painting, I think, in many ways. Anyway, just a quick thought on that. I was wondering if you since you mentioned this is the first time Ryoanji had come up, which is like such a famous place, particularly in Western imagination. I don't know if you had taken a look at this book by Yamada Shoji at all. If not, it might be one of real interest to you. He has a very strong argument that prior to the 19th century, the garden at Ryoanji was nothing like it is today. Right. That really took off in the 1950s, actually, with a movie that came out, Banshun, or early, is it mid-spring?
Spring?
Yeah, exactly. When you have what's that? Ozus, yeah, that famous black and white one. So the meaning of the garden was really related to him reflecting about, I think his daughter had gone off to college or something like that, and it's this kind of kind of a scene of reflecting on that and everything. And that in fact, up until that point, the garden was kind of more just a wasteland, really. It was just, it had weeds growing in it, it had kind of stuff around, but it wasn't, but it really took off after that film in terms of capturing kind of the imagination and being in the form that it's in now, actually, in a totally different story about what the rock arrangement was as well. Not as a meditative garden, but actually it was a storytelling one about the tiger and a tigress and her cubs. It was a kind of visual kind of representation, I guess. But anyway, there's a lot of complex issues there that are really interesting, though, of how it took on a kind of reality in right at that moment when you were talking about a kind of romanticizing of Zen as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chen. Thank you, James and Sergio. I think it's almost about time. And thank you guys for your incredible presentations. And I really think the discussion is really like sparkling ideas, and the students might have a lot to take away with it. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, James, Sergio again, and really hope to actually hold more events like this that is real, like interdisciplinary.
Great. Well, it was great to meet you all. Thank you all for organizing, and thanks to Sergio too. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, James. It was wonderful to meet you.
Yeah. Okay. Take care, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.
You too.
Thank you so much, and have a good day.